Today I'd like to talk about color. I have another video on my channel here on color. It's called The Key to Color, and it offers kind of an idea for a hands-on exercise to help you learn about color. Things like value and complements, mixing, neutrals. But today I'd like to talk first of all about a few references and tools that I use to help me learn about color, and then take you through a kind of fun exercise called Palette Hunt. What we do there is look for palettes around us and mix palettes to use for the whatever paintings that we want to make from them. It's kind of a fun way to expand your palette. I often reach for the same color when I paint, and so I find it kind of a useful way, this idea of hunting palettes, to kind of move my painting practice into new directions. Color is a huge topic, and after many, many years of painting, I'm still learning about it. I think the best way to learn is really to paint, paint, and then get some instruction or read, and then paint again. So basically repeat. A combination of hands-on and then checking in for some theory. And, each color has a personality. And just like people, we only get to know about them so much if we just read about them. It's better if we actually spend time with them to get to know them. So enjoy this video on color and hunting palettes. So the first thing, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this, is the color wheel. And if you've done some delving into color wheels, you know there's color wheels and color wheels. This is the traditional red, yellow, blue color wheel. You can find out a lot from this just simple little color wheel, like what it looks like if you add white to things, where your complements are. There's lots of information here, tints and tones. So I won't go into a lot of detail here, but there's a lot online about color wheels, and it's actually really fascinating, because it was really only more recently that the cyan, magenta, yellow color wheel, the one we use for printing, was invented. This one has been around for a long time. So I also turned to some books. This is kind of the Bible of color, Interaction of Color by Joseph Albers. This is a book that came out of the Bauhaus movement in the early 20th century, and that was kind of an idea of, it's like the arts and crafts movement, that all of the art forms should be practiced together. Art should infuse all of our, both our fabrics, our furniture, our architecture, as well as living in paintings in two dimensions. So it's kind of dense, and it's quite technical, but it is kind of the Bible on color. And if you really want to spend some time delving into the exercises, especially the color bits at the back, you'll be surprised if you haven't come across these concepts before. He says that color is the most relative of all of the elements of art, because there's the physical aspect of the color, but then there's how the eye sees it. And the way that the eye sees it has very much to do with the biology of our eye and vision. And so there's interaction of colors that have to do with how we see. Anyway, great book to delve into. One that I've been working through lately, if you've been following my post, is this one by David Hornung. And I actually worked through, I was kind of warming up, getting back into my studio. So I worked through some exercises in this book. And it's really very practical, really encourages you to get your hands in, and not literally, but lots of simple exercises. And there's also these little QR codes you can scan and then go to very short instructional videos that go with the material. So that's really interesting. One of the really key things that I was reminded of when I read this was the idea of chromatic darks. So a lot of the mixing that I've done, just making color swatches in the past, have been with the colors and black and white. But he suggests that you can use a chromatic dark. In other words, create a dark not with black, but with darks with colors that pull your mix into darks without using black. So the chromatic dark for warm colors is burnt umber, and the chromatic dark for cool colors is Payne's gray. And what I've done here is what he suggests you put on the color thickly. That's the mass color, what's called the mass tone, and then scrape it away to get what the undertone is. So this is more what would happen with the color if you glazed with it. So it sort of gives you the chance to see, the two aspects of the color. So I did work through a bunch of these. They were fun and relaxing. And here's a mix, a secondary mix that I made with French ultramarine and cadmium yellow. This is the what they call a prismatic orange, which is a true complement. And the two ingredients for that were cadmium yellow medium and pyrrole red. So when you're mixing complements, these were not true complements, because the French ultramarine has got some red in it. So when it, some red in it. And so does the cadmium yellow. And so they create a kind of muted green versus prismatic green, which is more the true complementary green, phthalo blue, and primary yellow. So anyway, these are fun to work through, and you can, you learn really a lot, and it's really information that you can take to your practice in a practical sense. What else do I have? I mixed a few of the darks, those chromatic darks, with other colors to see what they do. So these are really dark. They darken all these colors. This is phthalo blue, orange, prismatic orange, etc. And it's just experimenting to remind us what colors do when they mix together. And so as we work through color, we learn kind of the essential aspects of color, which are the three components of color, which are the hue, the actual pure color, the intensity, how intense the color is, and value, what kind of value the color has. But there's a couple of other things that are useful ideas to bring to color when you're mixing and playing with it and painting with it. That is saturation. So this is a sample of colors where I've desaturated them. So in other words, desaturating a color means taking the pure hue and then adding other stuff to it, so that it moves away from purity into other expressions of the color. And to make these, I used white, a mixture of gray with white and the chromatic darks, and complements. So each of those things kind of, I guess you could say they water the color down, but that's not exactly what they do. So this is just simply a useful idea to bring to your painting practice, that color is sometimes pure and sometimes desaturated. And you can use that just like you do the idea of value, where sometimes color is dark and sometimes color is light. And we're used to the idea of pushing values up against each other, lights against darks. But it was good for me to work through this, to be reminded that we can also play with the contrast of saturation. So push a really saturated color up against a really unsaturated color. So these were fun. kind of not exactly mindless, but relaxing, and got me back into my painting practice this summer. Now, in my Serious Fun class, one of the exercises that we've done, and this is on a video, one of my YouTube videos, called The Key to Color. And what we do there is we make a lot of mixes with three colors and black and white. And then we explore visual language and create shapes that, you know, share a visual language. And then we put them together in different ways so we can really see how color interacts. This is a monochrome palette. This is a complementary palette, a purple-yellow complementary palette. And actually these in real life don't quite look as blue as they do on the camera, but they were a blue that was slightly purpled with a little bit of red. So, and as we do this, we get to see how colors interact. What I really like to get them to look at is how values are important. So the composition becomes strong when you have a full range of values. And also how neutrals interact with color. So this neutral is a purple gray, and that's the neutral that really interacts with the yellows in here. And this is another dark neutral, darker value than this one. But again, you may not necessarily think this when you're working intuitively, but I think it's worth thinking about how the color in our neutrals interact with our pure hues. Because if you can push complementary color into your neutrals, it will have a much more dynamic interaction with the pure hues. So that's something that we look at in our color exercises of Serious Fun. Okay, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, and like I said at the beginning, color is a big topic, and I certainly don't expect you to absorb all of this. And also, as I said, I'm still learning myself, and always my goal is to create, you know, playful exercises to try to help us absorb the theory behind the various aspects of art that we have to master. I also, practically speaking, will sometimes I'll sometimes go to a mixing directory. This is a really good one, acrylic mixing directory, and I'll put all these references in a post on Artwork Art Play. So this one's just got lots and lots of pages of, you know, what different colors, how they interact with each other. And I don't actually use this whole palette. Like many artists, I have a palette that I work with, and there's other colors that I don't use that much. For instance, this one, Vivid Red Orange. But it's interesting to see how they interact with, you know, when they're mixed with complements, when you add white, when you water them down. You know, you can just thumb through it, and occasionally if I'm kind of stuck, I might look through this and see if I can find the color that I'm looking for. I find it hard to imagine color when I'm painting. So actually what I use more often are these color chips that I got from the paint store. And if you can find a nice person at the paint store and just explain to them that you're an artist and you need a whole set of these. They're well used. You can see they're all covered in paint. And I just find them really useful. I'll just, you know, fan them out and hold them up to a painting and, you know, try to figure out what might work. So that would be an example of more kind of going to color in an intuitive way. I think people with very deep understanding of color know in their mind, maybe kind of like music, they can imagine, you know, the notes that are needed, say in a composition. And I think people that are very good with color can do that too. But I find it helpful to just have something to grab. something to look at. These ones came in a set. These are a full set that I paid quite a bit for. These are from interior designers use these. And I mean, there's every single color you could ever imagine in these paint chips. So those are some of the tools that I use. Now, what I said I'd do today is a little bit about color mixing and color hunting. So here is an example of a color palette hunt that I took my students on in Serious Fun a couple of years ago. This is really fun. So this is a photograph by a photographer here on the West Coast called Leah Crow. She photographs for a business magazine here on Vancouver Island. And there's this fabulous photo spread she did a couple of years ago with just gorgeous colors. And you know, the thing is, probably the greatest source of actual design, and you could call it art in, you know, it's applied art in quotation marks, is advertising. We are awash in advertising images. And you know, these are professionals, these people, both the photographers and the graphic designers. And so they're working out a lot of these problems, and interior designers too. These problems of which colors go together. They're sorting out how the values work. You can see these darks are pulling the eye through in kind of a circular fashion that's echoing the circle of the model's face. Beautiful complementary palette here of pinks and greens. So I think this is a really fun thing to do, is just to go to a magazine or even walk around your town and find really arresting images. And then think about, how is the photographer or the graphic designer using color? What I had the students do was to go on a palette hunt and then to create a palette. This actually works a little better on a slideshow, but anyway, these aren't exactly true because they came off my printer. But this was the palette that I created for this image, from this image. You can see it's not fully complete. There were probably tones that I grabbed as I worked through the painting, that I then took this palette and applied the palette to. So this was just a photograph of a still life, which I gave the students, and they could take the palettes that they hunted and apply them to the still life. So that was fun. So this palette, which was from this image. So, you know, if you're having trouble, like for me, I often reach for the same colors over and over and over again. So I get in a bit of a, you know, I get in a bit of a groove that I'd like to get out of sometimes. And so this is a way to move us towards other palettes. So finally, I'd like to go through mixing a found palette with you. This is my image. This is a Kilim carpet from my living room. I really love fabrics. Quilts are great too for grabbing color ideas from. So I'm going to, on a piece of white paper, mix this palette for you. So the first thing that you have to decide when you're hunting a palette is, what are the colors you're going to start with? And when I looked at this, I thought, certainly alizarin crimson. Now this is where understanding color helps. So you bring your understanding to the process. And you know, this is something sometimes I talk about informed intuition with my students. Maybe it doesn't have to do so much with this exercise, but as we work, we can draw on both our intuition, but also what we know of, you know, color theory, all of the more theoretical aspects of art. So anyway, this red is a cool red. It's a red with a lot of blue in it. So if we were to look on the color wheel, so there, that's the fire engine red there, that's warm red. And this red more kind of moves into these areas here. So, you know, this part of color theory is maybe not very intuitive because, you know, we think, oh, all reds are hot. But some reds are cool, like alizarin, and some reds are hot, like cadmium red medium. And the same with the other colors. So, you know, we have an expression of each color which has, you know, different wavelengths of light. So these, as we move into the blues, these red wavelengths get shorter, and over here they get longer. That's the physics of it. But it's very helpful to understand that as a painter, because temperature helps you to move things back and forth in the plane of the painting. It influences how things mix together. So let's have a go at this. We'll start out with the alizarin crimson. And I'm going to get a piece of palette paper to mix my colors with. This is just, I'm going to put my colors on here. So alizarin is a color. I think French ultramarine blue, which is, again, a bluish red. Reddish blue. So French ultramarine blue, to talk about the temperatures of blue now, is more over in this part of the spectrum. So it's a cool, no, it's a warm blue. It's moving towards red. There's my French ultramarine blue. Actually, you know, just as an aside, the blues, the temperature of blues can be kind of complicated because some people will tell you that something like a cyan or a phthalo is warmer because it's closer to yellow. At any rate, it makes a better, those make better mixes with yellows to make a prismatic green. Ultramarine blue does not. Okay, I think there's a little bit of, we're going to need a green in here. There's some green here. This is a very neutralized green, but we'll need a little bit of pure green. So I've got a phthalo green to start with. And ochre, because there's some ochre colors in here. And I think, and then white. Oh, and I think this blue here is more of a cooler blue. It's more like a cobalt blue, which is actually more like a very neutral blue. So we can't make this blue using French ultramarine because French ultramarine is too red. So I am going to grab a cobalt as well. Here's a cobalt right here. And of course, titanium white. So I'll just set up my palette with those. These are the golden heavy body paints, which are beautiful paints. But sometimes the lids are not easy. They get sort of gummed up. This is the phthalo green yellow shade. Here's our ultramarine blue. Ochre. Alizarin. And we'll get some white, titanium white. Now I'll mix the red first. And there might be different values of that red. Some will be darker than others. There's different tones of the red here. There's some really quite dark. That's almost a purpley red. Still, though, I think that the alizarin is our base color there. These are lighter, and there's some really lighter pinks. So as I mix here, we can create a variety of tones with the alizarin. Okay, so now alizarin is kind of transparent, so we'll just add a little bit of, just a touch, a dab of white to it. With really transparent colors, if you just add a little, just a dab of white, you get to kind of see the nature of the color a bit better. Kind of releases the nature of the color. Okay, so that's, just got a little bit of water on my brush there. Let's do a couple different values of those. There's our light pink. I'm going to get another color too, that burnt umber. Remember that burnt umber is the chromatic dark you can use with warm colors. So what happens if we add some burnt umber to this alizarin crimson? Now for this one, I'm going to use my Liquitex burnt umber. I really like these. I like the lids on these. They're easy to get off. It's a little bit of a creamier mix than the golden heavy body. So what happens if we add just a touch of burnt umber to that mix? It neutralizes the color. So burnt umber has some red in it. So it's not fighting with the red. It's not going to turn it into a really dark neutral. It just creates a kind of warm brown. And I think that that is in our, this could possibly be in here. Okay, let's carry on. I'm going to add, I think we could push that just a little bit lighter too, to one pink that's even a little lighter, to kind of match this one. But this is a tiny bit neutralized as well, so it's going to have still a little bit of umber in it, which I have on my brush. So now in general with palettes, I think it's a really good idea to use as few colors as possible. I'm just going to turn my lights on and see if I can get a better light on that. Yeah. You know, keep your palette as limited as possible, and before you reach for another color, see if you can make what you need with the colors that you're working with already. Okay, so let's move into, let's create some darker and purple versions of this red. So the alizarin and French ultramarine makes a really beautiful purple. If we add a little bit of white to that, you can see it kind of releases the color. So there's a darker purple, but I think it's also neutralized in the rug. So we're going to add a little bit of umber to that. Remember, that's the chromatic dark you can add to warm colors. So a little touch of white to that to kind of release the color. Add a little bit. I'm just going to sort of do a stream of consciousness as I work here. Added a little bit more blue in here to bring it to more purple. So I'm making a whole range of these reds, from light to dark, from fairly saturated to really unsaturated. So there's the color of that dark. Okay, let's go to the greens. So the phthalo green is a really, like it's a really cheesy green, you know, like very, the phthalos to me look kind of chemical and like not really something you'd find in nature. So they pretty much to me always need toning down. But this green I think will add a little umber to it, even though this is not the chromatic dark for a cool color, but the umber has got some red in it, so it's going to neutralize the green. It's like adding the complement. We'll just add a little spot of white to release it and see what that looks like. It's still a bit green. Let's add a little bit of the alizarin to it too. So the more that you kind of add things back and forth between your palette colors, the more harmonious your palette's going to be. So that's a really dark green, maybe darker than we have in the rug. And I think what it really needs is a little bit of yellow ochre. And yellow ochre is an earth tone, so it automatically kind of neutralizes things, softens them down, makes them look a bit more organic, particularly the phthalos. So, you know, I think I might add a little bit of umber back into that. So, you know, this could be infinite. I could make small adjustments to really make slightly different tones. And I think I'll add just a little bit more white. I'm still trying to get this color right here. And of course in the rug the color is formed by the interaction of different threads, but we're not really paying much attention to that. Probably this really needs a little bit of burnt sienna actually, but I'm not going to add another color right now because I want to keep this pretty limited. So there's some greens. And you know, with this hunting a palette, the real, you know, it's nice to try to get it exact. But what it allows you to do is explore a new palette. And if you create some colors that aren't in your source, that's okay. You know, that's something that maybe you'll turn to. Okay, so let's see what we've got. We've got all the pinks and reds. We've got the green, or the really dark neutral from our alizarin. We don't have kind of a purest blue yet, like these. We'll go for this blue and this one and see what we can do here. So I'm going to add just a touch of white to the ultramarine. But you can see that that's way too bright. That's not what's in there. So let's neutralize it with a little bit of umber. Add a little bit of white back into that. It's kind of like cooking. You just have to keep kind of working with it till you get it. That's a little lighter than the blue in there, but it's a really beautiful color. So I'm gonna grab it. I'm gonna steal it and put it here on my palette. I'm going to add just a little bit of green to the blue and see what we can come up with too. And some umber. So I'm just playing, really. Oops, that's cobalt. There's something kind of green in that blue, gray-green. So I'm going to just add a little bit of the phthalo to that. Beautiful color. Not sure it's exactly what we've got in the carpet, but and then if we add a little bit more white, that might come a little closer to it. Now these are probably turning out a little darker on the camera from a distance, so I'm going to pull this up so you can have a better look at the colors that I've got so far. And I will photograph these and put them on the page so that you can maybe see them truer to color. And we'll see about that paler blue. Here's the cobalt blue. So cobalt blue is kind of what I call it, a kind of a sweet blue. It's neither very cool, and it's not hot either. And again, I think we'll just neutralize it just a touch with a touch of umber. See how it just kind of grays it down a little bit? Kind of neutralizes the blue. And there's one that's really quite light, so we'll just lighten that up. Some of these are really light. And then finally there's some ochres and you know, these kind of wheat colors in here, and then there's one that's a bit more gold and some that are kind of a green. So let's just work in those colors, see what we can make. So we could try first of all just pure ochre, yellow ochre. And lighten it up with titanium white. That's a bit bright. What if we added a little green to it and a little umber to kind of tone it down to get some of those greeny golds? These are also beautiful colors. I tend to reach for a lot of bright colors, and I think a lot of us do that because, you know, the colors that come out of the tube are so beautiful, but it's really important to develop your neutral palettes. So, you know, learn how to mix complements and then add darks back into them and more whites. And basically, you know, you want to kind of take the palette you're working with and mix everything together, see how it works, and then take a little bit of your mixes and mix them back in to create a whole range of different mixes and neutrals. I think that's pretty much, oh, I wanted to do just a pure umber and white too, because there's one that's a color in there that's almost pure umber and white. So here's our burnt umber. Just add some titanium white. You can get very subtle lightening of hues by using mixing white or zinc white. It just shifts the hue a little bit lighter without making much of a change. That's why it's called a mixing white. Sometimes if we use titanium white with everything, we get a kind of pastel palette. Maybe we want that. But sometimes in landscape, we want just subtler lightening, and then the zinc white or mixing white is good for that. So that's kind of the umber color we get here, kind of a pale soil color almost. I'll just lighten it up one more step. So that's my found palette from my Kilim carpet. And something interesting happened yesterday is I actually hunted another couple of palettes from my photos. These are photos taken in an alpine area near where I live in the fall. So beautiful fall tones, two different shots. And I thought just for fun I'd sit down and try to mix these palettes too. Because sometimes we want to look at something that we want to paint and we want to mix the palette for that painting. So that's not exactly like a palette hunt. Like this was going to some other crazy source. Like I'm not planning to do a painting of this carpet, but I wanted to steal the palette from it and then use it. Ideally, we'd use it in with some other subject. You could do a representational subject, I suppose, and just, use this palette rather than fall into the representational palette. So that's one way we can abstract, say in landscape, is by choosing a different palette from the actual real palette in front of us of the landscape. But sometimes we want to just figure out before we start painting what is the palette of this painting. And the really interesting thing was when I worked out the palette, it turned out to be exactly the same palette as the Kilim carpet. So I guess that's just a palette that I'm attracted to. And my house is full of these colors too, so it's not really surprising. See if I can find that one for you. This was it. So basically it had a few more warms in it, a little fewer reds, and some kind of earth tones for the soil, this kind of path, the wet soil path. But it turned out to be the exact same colors that I used for the carpet. Oh, and also, of course, as with most landscape, a lot of different greens.